Yeah. So welcome to Materials and Methods. So yeah, as you mentioned, Elizabeth, the first thing you probably want is the Learn Key. So for this evening's class, the Learn Key is up on the board there, 122752019. So that's basically the course registration number, CRN, plus 2019 added on the end. So for the external students listening at home, you will have been emailed your Learn login key. So once you've entered that key, you have access to this Learn page. It will look slightly different. I'm still getting my head around this, so I saw this new Learn page for the first time on Sunday night when I had a bit of a look at it in prep for Monday's classes. So there's a little bit of learning for me to do. So I've got to work out better ways of presenting things within the class. So currently I'm in editing mode as lecturers always are. We have to resolve that. But apart from that, your Learn page will look very much the same. So in here, very simple welcome. There's this important date, 25th of November 2019, is the final due date to submit everything this semester. But that's after all of the due dates for all of the assignments. I don't stick so much to a regimented structure. This is this week. This is this week. Sometimes we'll progress through a bit quicker. Sometimes we'll progress a bit slower, depending on the needs and knowledge of the group. But one thing I do have to be a stickler on are the assignment due dates, because being such a heavy course, we've got 90 nominal hours for this subject. There is really not the time. If we start pushing things out, well, then that condenses too much at the end, and so it's unachievable. You really have to stick to those dates to actually make it through. So they're all set basically in your best interest, is what I'm saying. So as I mentioned, 90 nominal hours for this subject. That means you're expected to do approximately 5 hours a week on this subject. That's 2.5 hours in the class here, and then 2.5 hours outside of the class. Also, be aware that it is, as the title suggests, it is a research subject. So primarily it is about the research that you carry out, and the research that you carry out will definitely be reflected in your reports. There is a very distinct correlation between students who do plenty of research and students who produce good reports. Sounds like a bit of a no-brainer, but and I'll go into the structure of the reports a little bit better later on, but basically it's not really possible for you to complete these reports by just going online, cutting and pasting and dropping stuff in. Because what I'm expecting those reports are short, succinct answers to specific aspects, and you'll very rarely find short, succinct answers to specific aspects. These specific aspects on the internet. So it is really about you collating all this information, reading it, getting an idea of it, summarising it, giving me short, succinct answers within the reports. We'll have a look at that a little bit more later on. And so I've got a welcome video here. I shot that just before the class, so what was it, about half an hour ago, or a bit more, getting an hour ago now, and just uploaded that. That basically says what we've discussed now. So if you're in the class, not so important. So also as a sort of as a requirement, if I am to organise any leniency for you later on, which may happen for various different reasons, I'm typically asked for, have they submitted their application for extension for these things. Now, certainly, being such a small class, etc., I can negotiate all these things with you. This will be you let me know things in advance, whatever. But if it's really looking like that toward the end of the semester, I'll have to say, look, yes, you really need to have that application for extension. There's a little bit of information about, so ABS, that's Advanced Building Studies, that's it's the department that we fall under. A little bit of information there if you wish, and also take say website, but you would have seen that one already. Following on from that, course information. So, as we sort of alluded to before, all of these subjects are based strictly upon units of competency that are part of that national framework. So, we have to assess in accordance to those things. We don't necessarily have to deliver in accordance to the unit of competency. I can go above and beyond that. We can digress, etc. That's all fine. But at the end of the day, I have to tick each one of you and say, you've done that, you've done that. Particularly for this subject, it is very prescriptive. A very long list of things to do. That's more for me to worry about than for you to worry about. By all means, have a look. There are two documents. There's the unit of competency, but then there's also what is it called? Well, the assessment guidelines. And they have to be read in conjunction with each other. You know, if you're into that sort of thing. But basically, that's my job to make sure those boxes are ticked. There's a little here about referencing. By all means, it is a research subject. You will be grabbing bits and pieces of information from other sources. That's fine. I'm not a stickler about it being like the Harvard system of referencing or anything like that. We're not at that level, and this isn't, a master's thesis. This is, a research report for construction materials and methods. But what I do not want to see is blanket cutting and pasting. Well, A, because it's going to be very hard to produce good reporting if that's what you're doing. But B, if you're doing that and then passing that off as your own work without any referencing, yes, it's plagiarism. So by all means, reference as you go through it. There's a guide here to referencing, or two guides to referencing. Oh, yeah, so because I'm in editing mode, it shows some of the sections which are not shown to students. Although, I'll make that one actually available because it's up there now. So over here. So that's it. It's a bit slow, but yeah, that's our semester 2 2019 learning program. As I said before, it's a general guide as to how we'll be progressing through, but it won't be hard and fast. And there's a brief summary about the assessment tasks there, but we'll get into that. We've got more detailed information on that. In fact, let's go there now. So go there before we do. Let's get started. So assessments for this unit are the filing task. That's where you have to produce a research repository of folders and subfolders for all of your PDFs and documents that you'll typically be referring to in your design work.
Do you give us a list of those different types of documents? Because
no, I don't. That's something that I'm expecting you to build up as you go. But I will allude to these things as we keep going through it.
Because that doesn't, I mean, what you've just said to me doesn't make a lot of sense.
Yeah.
I don't know what context to do that.
Yeah, no, and there's no expectation that you will.
So it's basically a research library.
A research library. Yep. So to give you a bit of background to it, if let's say I'm designing a timber frame and I've worked out all my uplift and I want to do tie downs, and I've got a lot of uplift happening on this frame, my standard sort of M10 blue tip masonry anchors aren't going to do it. I'll go to the Ramset catalogue, look through there, see what other masonry anchors I can use that have that correct sort of edge distance to create the tie down that I need and the spacings I need. So that Ramset catalogue is probably something I don't want to keep downloading every single time I want to just look up, the tie down capacity of a bolt.
Oh, is Ramset just tie downs, or is Ramset something else?
Ramset do many types of fixings. Typically, as designers, you'll be looking at things like Dynabolts and other screw-in masonry anchors, chem sets, and even hand-driven nails in sleeves. So you'll be looking at those typically. But you'll be referring to Prida catalogs. So there's a company called PRYDA. They do post shoes, a lot of formed metal products that are used once again in timber framing. So they do truss tie downs and other preform tie downs, things like that. They do short wall bracing designs. Yeah. And we'll understand more about this as we go through, and you'll be alluding to these things as you go through. But when you're doing your research on these things, you'll come across all of these things. So we're looking more at product catalogues and installation guides.
So that's the sort of stuff that you're looking at filing, product catalogues and...
Exactly, that is the sort of stuff you're looking at filing. Now, back when I started out working as a drafter, it was a big bookshelf of all of these design guides. We would have somebody come around every now and again and update our library from various representatives from various different companies who go, oh yes, we've got this, we've got the new one, blah, 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 and drop them in. Of course, now it's all digital.
Yeah.
But because we don't want to, as I mentioned before, we don't want to keep downloading them every time we want to refer to them. It's great to have them in your library, and then update them periodically as you go, because these things do become updated.
So it's a digital bookshelf.
It's a digital bookshelf, and that's what I want you to be creating. And it's a digital bookshelf that should be easily navigable by somebody who doesn't know. So if you send me a screenshot of your filing system, I want to be able to say, okay, we've got internal linings, and then drop that down. We've got plasterboard installation guides, and then we've got CSR Red Book, we've got Boral.
And you might say things like, for instance, with something like that, I mean, like obviously sort of like to get that relational database that you're really asking. You're asking for somewhere between a relational database and an actual physical file system, right? You're not asking for a database that sort of like clicks in. So what you're really looking at is that you're looking at, you may well want to use shortcuts. Because, as long as you're happy with me, sort of like, because I'm not going to download something into 3 different locations. You want one source of truth.
Yes.
So you just basically have a shortcut to a particular folder. So I would just, in terms of presenting what I've got in terms of my digital thing, I would have just a screenshot of my drill down list. And some of those would be actual physical documents if they only fit it in one place. But if they were sort of like, ties and sort of like, footings, sort of like, the whatever, I would have if it came in one place, or it may actually be a different site, and then there's also sort of, then I would just have a shortcut to that from a different folder.
Sounds excellent.
So that's what you're looking for, just a screenshot of what I've done.
Yeah, exactly. So I want you to show me a screenshot of what you've done, to show me that you can put together this library
screenshot
of information.
Lovely. Screenshot.
And this is fantastic. Some of you are going to come up with different ways of organising all of this information. It's not always a one size fits all scenario, and you're all going to go out from here and end up working in very different fields, right? The repair and reinstatement engineering work is miles away from somebody who's modifying pre-designed homes at Rivergum also is, and what they would be referring to is vastly different than what. So it's all about tailoring this to your needs, but it's about creating that research repository and updating that research repository as we move through the course. That's what
Right.
gets assessed.
Right. The updating. So the updating is a second assessment, is it?
So the updating is whenever you submit one of your research tasks. So we've got these two tasks to begin with. Then we've got research task 1, 2, and 3. Every time you submit that, you also submit another screenshot of your filing system to show that it's grown since the first.
Yeah.
And as a second, and what I'm asking for in this filing task is that you create that library, but then you also use the OneNote program as like a digital scrapbook. So that's, you're familiar with OneNote?
A bit, yeah.
A bit, yeah.
It is still a little confusing to me.
Yeah.
I don't even know what OneNote is really, and I've had it on the script system for years. So what is so special about OneNote?
It's quite good in that you can you can add anything to it. So you've got, let's have a look at OneNote now while we're on this.
I find it somewhat of a expansion to what Inspiration used to be.
Mm-hmm.
If you remember that program.
No, I've never used
I've
Inspiration.
never heard of it. Yeah. Okay, let's have a look.
Yeah, so you'll all have access to OneNote through Office 365. So when you log into the portal, you've got that button there, Office 365. And what you can do, once you've created your OneNote, you can share it with me. So I'll have access to it all the time. So I'll pull up one of mine. Now this is not exactly how you'd be setting it out for this subject. I'll just go over that once, but it should work for. Let's get it open. Should work for that understanding of what the OneNote is capable of. Now this is doing, okay, now it's got them there. Earlier on today, these little bits weren't popping up, they're important bits. So, as I said before, it's like a digital scrapbook. You've got all these tabs down the side, which are different sections.
Mm-hmm.
So, I create that OneNote, and there's a very short tutorial video in the section Let's Get Started about using OneNote. Once you've named your OneNote, basically, these will be all blank, all right? And you go, well, let's add a section, put your section name in. Example, there we go, and it comes in alphabetically. Now, under that section example, we don't have any pages in there, but to add a page, same thing, just go add page down here, and then we can add a whole heap of pages, and we title them by adding our titles.
Right. And they can actually just be direct links, or they can be pages of information, or they can be links to other things on a server, can they be?
Yes. Yep. So you can. So let's have a look. So here we go. I've got under flame zone. So I'm looking into constructing the flame zone area. Grabbed this link. This is a product. It's a magnesium oxide board that you can use for your linings underneath.
Yeah.
It gives you that fire resistance level
Yeah.
for putting the flame zone. So there we go. We've got that URL. Click on that URL. It'll take me to FireCrunch.
Fantastic. Okay.
So.
But there's no drill down in that. There's no way to drill down. So design guides, you can't actually drill down so that the whole thing looks like a.
No. So I do have a section here for design guides, and I've got that. So I've got different pages, so concrete footings, and I've got links to those design guides. So let's have a look at timber framing and fixes. What do I have under there? I think under there.
Can you actually print it as a drill down?
You can. Yes, I haven't really got that.
Because that would be the alternative to actually sort of like setting it up, sort of like, yeah. I'm just thinking about how to.
But have a muck around. So this is your scrapbook. Use it as you wish.
Absolutely.
So the reason I didn't say just provide me with a formal filing system that has folders and subfolders. You could also use this for mucking around, grabbing stuff, playing around. So because I found. So I was doing my builder's license stuff recently. I used this for that, for collating all this information. And as you go through and collate all that information, you typically learn it all. So went through, and so some of this stuff I wrote myself. Some of it, links, copied other things. Where would I have grabbed some pictures? Maybe for work I grabbed pictures. No, mostly links. Notification stages. So what you can also do now, mostly for a lot of this stuff, I've grabbed links, but you can take screenshots and drop them in. You can put videos in, drop them in. Yeah. So I've got video resources. I can't find anywhere where I've actually dropped pictures in, but yeah, you can do it. Is what I'm saying. So typically, and I'll show you another. Go back. I'll here from there. So this is a student from last semester. If he doesn't mind. So that's what he pulled together. Task 1, task 2, and then in task 1, various different categories. Dropping all these bits in.
Right. So you're actually so how you're working your assessment is that you see this, so you see what the background research is.
Yeah.
And then you see these short, sharp, succinct statements based upon this research background.
Exactly. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So I'm not thoroughly pouring through all of your research. That's this is really for you. And you get out of it what you put in basically.
Yeah.
But that will all be reflected in your report.
But it also may be that I say something and you can sort of like, why is she saying that about that particular type of material?
Exactly.
And it's like, well, where did you get that from? You can go in here and go, well, I'm looking for sort of like floor materials or concrete or whatever it is. And you go, oh, right, okay, so she's pulled it out of there.
Yeah.
Can I just ask now, in terms of your research sources, because I'm seeing quite a lot of just websites with different sort of like, and I've actually done a unit that was quite similar to this in some ways in 2013. Probably not as long, probably not 90 points, but it was part of the Queensland Technique. And it was very much, you find your source where you can. So, for instance, Build for Living, which will be more kind of, it may be sort of like, it's not expert knowledge, but it's expertish knowledge. Those sorts of references. What is your standard of reference in terms of this stuff?
Well, that is a very difficult thing to define. What I will suggest you look for is primarily start by looking for Australian resources. Don't dabble with American and UK. They have different building regulations there. They have different terminology, and they have different building products there. Keep it Australian. Secondly, I think keep it formal. So there are organisations like Wood Solutions, the Concrete and Cement Aggregates Australia, various different organisations or various different industry bodies that cater for information about building products based on that type of material. So
those are your primary resources.
Those are your primary, yeah.
You may need to drill down to, when I did this in 2013, I was using UK stuff because there were particular kind of scripts that were kind of very kind of traditional to blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
And at that point, I was drilling down into, you know, sort of like XYZ historian on, you know, screens. So it's kind of a secondary resource in some ways, but it's, you know, because the primary stuff will come from concrete. What do they call concrete foundation?
Yeah, CCA, concrete cement.
It's cement or whatever.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so, and by all means do that, but yeah, do be aware of resources from other countries, because they have different building codes and different sets of standards. What we have to do within Australia is we have to build to the National Construction Code and all of the reference standards within that. And so you'll find that there are certain screeds that don't meet that. So
These are the traditional features.
But some of them will. Like, so some of them are not at all an issue. There's some of these things are not even covered by the NCC or referenced by Australian standards, because it's not a health, safety, and livability issue.
Yeah.
So use your own discretion about those things. And I know that's a dangerous thing to say, but it's what we always have to do. That's how you end up sort of moving beyond just the standard. This is how we build thing, because it is going to be simple if you keep it to those industry bodies and then product suppliers, and that is by and large the bulk of the way that building happens. It's standard form materials, products that are commercially available, plus
friendly industry bodies plus suppliers.
Yeah, that's going to be the simplest. But as we move through our different research tasks, you'll have different motivations for your research. So task one is a simple detached residential house. Detached residential houses, that's primarily about materials and reference to NCC Volume 2, which is very prescriptive about how we go about building. So it's about the use of materials and then and the trades that make those materials into a house. We then move on to multi-residential development. Multi-residential development is far more about building products. It's about prefabricated elements, pre-designed sections that come in quickly, get that development to market. Because typically, when you start going into multi-residential construction, it's developers that are working in that space. Developers are very much concerned with how quickly can we turn this around? How quickly can it go from site to product to being sold? So
how quickly can they get money in their pocket?
Exactly, yeah. And how soon can they stop losing money out of their pocket? Because if they're paying interest on a site which is sitting there, at least it's multi-residential sites.
There's a massive opportunity.
Yeah. So that's one of the major impetuses for that form of construction. You'll be looking at different things. Like you'll be researching, and that's got to be far more about your products. Then, as we move into commercial construction, it's a little bit of a mix between both. It's about your materials, it's about your products, it's about speed of construction, but it's also about engineered solutions. So we start going back to thinking more about materials, but then materials plus engineer gives us options. So, and then we start dealing with solutions which are typically not financially feasible for either the single residential or multi-residential developments, but are definitely financially feasible for larger commercial projects. So you're going to, for each of those three projects, your research will be different because you'll be looking at different types of things. And so the final one, that is going to be a little bit more referred to industry bodies and also other other reliable sources of information, and you're going to have to determine, okay, is this a particularly good, reliable source of information or not? And that's going to be in part by cross-referencing by other pieces of information you've got, building up that knowledge. So once you've got that knowledge base, it's going to be easier to determine what is a good source of information and what is not. So, you've got your formal filing system set up, you've got your OneNote set up, and you've shared your OneNote with me. That's one thing I didn't show you, but it's very simple. Actually, if I open this one, we should have a bit of it. Gee, it looks different all the time. So sometimes it looks like a silhouette of a little person, and sometimes we've got this share. But anyhow, it's up on the top right-hand side of the page. You go to share. So what I'll ask you to do when this first one is due, and that's due in a couple of weeks' time. There's not a huge amount of time, but it should only take you sort of half an hour or so to get that initial setup happening. And it's about me checking that you've done that initial setup, and then you've got time for me to say, go back,
You'll give us enough information to do that initial setup.
Exactly. Yeah. It is an assessment, but it's more about getting that right to begin with to get you to move on. So you share it with me. So you go share, and then type in email address and share it with me. Now my email address is under course information, so when you click on course information, my email address will be there. So I won't click to that yet, stay with these. So you've done that, and then after that you've got a group task, which is BAL Materials Assessment. Now BAL, that stands for Bushfire Attack Level. So that's something that will be fairly familiar to you by the time you walk out of the tape. The reason for that is that it was since the Black Saturday fires over Victoria, there has subsequently been quite a ramping up of both regulation around building bushfire-prone areas, but also in actually assessing those. So for any building that's in a high bushfire risk area, so we've got certain categories of bushfire attack level, low, medium and high, and then those categories are broken down into subcategories. We'll look at that further later. But for any of the high categories, you have to have a CFS referral. So somebody from the CFS organisation, and these are not the volunteers where the orange suits, these are CFS organisation. They will come out and do an assessment. Is this building in BAL 40? Is it in flame zone? Is it not even high? They'll give that assessment, but they'll also give their assessment of your access tracks, things like that, to say yes, that complies with everyone. Now, what you're asked to do in this group task is I will give you a summary sheet from a private certifier that you can look at, and then you look at our building for research task 1. Look at that building and go, okay, we're in this particular bushfire attack level. How can I ensure that this building meets those requirements for that? And so you look at that summary sheet, and you do this as a group. So you have a look at those things and say, well, we're going to have to ensure that the size of gaps is no greater than 2 millimetres to our cladding, that we have steel posts to the bottom 75 millimetres of our studs, etc., etc. And it is very much choose your own adventure. But what I'm wanting you to do is engage with that summary sheet from the private certifier to have a look at what materials we've got and how we can ensure that they fit. Is there anything here which will be a no-no and we have to significantly change? So it's just about working as a group and discussing that, and then presenting your findings to the client as you would. So
yeah, we did actually get something in another class about I can't remember who it was, but some sort of certifier or something about appropriate materials of bushfires. So this is some kind of class that relates to that.
Okay. Yeah,
So,
great. So what class was that one?
That was, sure, that was compliance.
Yeah. And that was with Anne-Marie, was it?
I think so, yeah. No, that was, so the first one was Madeline, and the second one was, I'm pretty sure the second one was compliance, and I don't know, I can't remember who my lecturer was. It could have been, yes, it was Anne-Marie Borges.
Yeah. So she would have given you this one, I think.
What's that?
So,
yeah,
Catnish Dodd, they are a private certifier. And we'll have a bit of discussion about private certified later on. But you'll probably find there's a bit of crossover between this and the compliance.
That's good.
Yeah, and I'll try to minimise those crossovers as efficient as possible, but we're dealing with some.
No, maximise them, make it as easy as possible.
Yeah. So you've already been given this one, but it's here on the Learn site for you, and that's actually really good information that's not normally let out. By the way, this is how to say it. It's intellectual property, basically. So this is how private certifiers go about their business. They don't get the NCC out, they don't get AS 3959 out, they don't get Minister Specification SA 78 out and do that every single project. No, they make a summary of all these things, bring it all together into one document that's going to be a checklist. That's how they do their work. You're typically not going to be given all of these things until you get a good relationship with your private certifier. Yeah, exactly. And so this is only a very small snippet of what they do in their work. You take this, you've got to certify buildings. So you have that, and then your group task instructions are very similar to what I've just explained to you now. And so you will then present that to the client, me, and say, this is what we're going to be doing with that building to make sure it complies. Then, following those two tasks, then there's research task 1. Now, I've given you the task instructions and then also an office template. As you probably know, whenever you write a report, you never write a report from scratch. Well, I've never written a report from scratch. I've written thousands of reports.
I've created the templates, but But yeah, I mean, every report should be following a standard format, or it would just become someone else's, and people just forget how to read things.
Or forget to add things.
Exactly.
So that's what I've done with this. Makes it easy for me, makes it easy for you. I've created headings and subheadings.
Can I just ask about the signatures? There's up the top, there's this requirement for a signature, but I mean, on the web.
Yeah. Only you can upload it to your portal. You have to log in to be able to upload it to your portal. This is a tape. What's that?
Old style tape?
No, these are the current templates which came out very recently, but it's to cover all situations. So shearers who might be assessing students on a station out at wherever, they use the same templates that we use.
So we just type our name in and that's fine.
Type your name, that's fine. If you're uploading it to Learn, I know that it's you because you're not going to log in to Learn and get somebody else to.
Well, it's my login.
Exactly. So
I've validated through my login and through uploading through my login, but I've done it myself.
Exactly. Yeah. So that satisfies it for me, and as yet that hasn't been tested. There hasn't been any auditor to say no, you must not. So this is just a TAFE-wide template that we have to use. We have to bring these things on the top, but that's because it's a one size fits all, but not necessarily applicable to all. So in your reports, produce a short executive summary that just says, these are some key points in there. And in that, we've got building classification, as per NCC, we'll talk about that a little bit later. Local council zoning, so to find out what local zoning is. Bushfire attack level, you find out the bushfire attack level at that same time. I'll show you how to do all these things. And then also, you have to determine the dedicated water supply for firefighting. So we'll get into that next week. So we'll be looking at those things next week. So after next week, you could go and go and populate these things.
I think it's relevant.
Yeah, and then put in the report contents. Beyond that, you've got headings and subheadings. So those, they guide you. So what you're given is you're given a project. So this is the project, and it tells you we're looking at various different options for things. So for our footings, for the foundation building, well, so for the footings, so the foundations are soil underneath the footings. But for our footings, we're looking at a concrete raft slab, we're looking at suspended timber framing, and we're looking at suspended steel framing. Looking at those three options.
Yeah.
Under each, I want short, succinct answers that address these things. So sustainability considerations such as embodied energy, thermal mass, life cycle analysis of a concrete raft slab. Same thing for suspended timber
Can
framing.
you just start for a second? You've
Yeah.
got a thing, put in contents, report contents. That's just a thing that we delete. We delete the words report contents and we just enter into the section one structure, etc.
Yes, you can. Yeah. So you can use. Yeah. So that's.
I didn't know what that was. It was like what did stupid little part. Yeah, it's just put specific statement of brief. This. And then specific compliance requirements, this report will address the following, or something.
Yeah. So statement of project brief that says we are looking at this single residential development at yeah. So this is what we're looking at. Aspects research. Say we've looked at various different footing options, framing options, services options.
Fantastic.
So just provide that summary as you would at the start of every report.
Right.
Report content. In many, like
report content, section 1 structure, section 2 blah, section 3 blah, section 4 blah. That's
okay.
Exactly. Next.
Yeah.
Okay, got it.
Yep.
Continue, please.
Great.
Sorry.
Yeah, that's great. So work your way through these, and so these things are going to make more sense as we get through the weeks. One thing here, cost considerations. Now, for that, I'm not looking for detailed costings. I'm not looking for rates per square metre, rates per cubic metre, these types of things. I'm looking for general statements around comparisons of cost. Things like, a concrete raft slab is going to be a more expensive option than suspended timber framing.
Yes.
Suspended steel framing is going to be slightly more expensive than suspended timber framing, but cheaper than concrete. So it's just about
those
it's cost in relation to the other options.
Exactly, yeah. But also I'm not looking for specific things. So these are just general statements that should be able to pick up.
So things like concrete is more fire resistant than wood.
Yeah.
But it costs a lot more than anything else.
Yeah, but you'll be going through so basically you've got to think about, so your audience is like a client who will be reading that, or somebody else in the office who are going like, okay, so if we go with this option, it's got that. We want those things. It's going to have this, which we don't really want, but we weigh that all up. It's that ability to collate this information and compare those. And beyond that, also compliance requirements, relevant Australian standards, relevant section of the NCC. So when it comes to timber framing, you're going to have a look at NCC Volume 2, timber framing. It's going to say AS 1684, timber framing code, and AS 720, timber structural design, and it's going to be part.
Excellent. And that's all you want, the reference to the point in the document where it can be found.
Exactly. Yep. So to show that you've been to the NCC, you know where it is, you know what those reference Australian
What about suspended steel framing? Is that under NCC?
Yes. So there's a section in the NCC, but it gets a little bit tricky with steel framing in that there's not an Australian standard for steel framing, but there is a reference document which is the National NASH, I can't remember what it stands for, but it's still housing.
Right.
So it's their guidebook. So that is.
But
so
if it's in the NCC, and the NCC's referenced it, that's what you want to know. What are the standards and what do they reference?
Exactly.
Fantastic. And in terms of concrete, because I didn't think that was covered at all under NCC. part?
No, it is. Yeah, definitely. So we've got a section on footings and slabs, and we'll reference AS 2870 residential footings and slabs, and then you also have AS 3600 for concrete structures.
Right.
Mentioned in both.
Right.
So yeah, you will be able to find all of these things
That's the treat.
within the Volume 2 NCC.
Yeah,
and I want to see that you've gone in there and you've found them. There's also another thing within both Volume 1 and Volume 2 of the NCC. About, I don't know, page 20 or so, it's fairly early on, it's got a list of referenced Australian standards. So when you find each section, you'll have your Australian standard pop up there under the deemed as satisfying approach. But also, if ever you want a list of Australian standards that's going to be referred to by the NCC, you can just go to that list.
Fantastic. Yeah. Excellent.
Yeah, because while you're studying here, you'll have access to SAI Global, you have access to all of that.
Yeah.
So it's a good guide for, these are the things I want to be looking at. So we're covering things such as floor structure and footings, cladding, and then services. So our services in this case consist of dedicated water supply and some of the aspects around determining what that dedicated water supply is, and then also for whether we have NBN connectivity in that area, and first of all, current status of NBN connection and current availability of NBN, and address whether that's satellite, fixed wireless, fibre to node, fibre to the premises.
Where do we get that information? Because like last night, I've just had NBN put on, and I can just type it into TPG or whatever. It's TPG. But the actual current status of NBN connection, is there any places that refer to somewhere where I can actually get genuine? Because at the moment, as a consumer, I go out there and TPG tells me what it wants to tell me.
Yeah.
But
there is. I've got a link within the Learn page.
You've got a link.
Yeah.
Perfect.
So click on that. So we'll have a look at that in weeks to come. That's a little bit later down the track. So that's our first research task. I won't go into research task 2 and research task 3. They follow very, very similar format. Research task 3 gets a little bit more into doing a simplified energy analysis of a commercial building. But beyond that, very similar things. The headings and subheadings obviously change. We're looking at different requirements for the different types of construction as we move through. So that's the assignments, and so all of the information is there, and then you'll also have these links here, and wherever you've got these blue arrows, that's where you submit your work to. So click on that and submit through there. So that's right, we've been through course information. Let's get started. So, got three projects: Class 1 building, Class 2, Class 5, and 6, and that will make a little bit more sense after tonight. Now, next thing is, what is the importance of this unit training? Why learn about materials and methods? Well, there are a host of reasons, but probably a very good reason is the liability around your specification of things. So, does everybody in this room know about the Grenfell Tower? No Grenfell Tower? Do you know the?
Are you Melbourne?
No, in London. But there was what is it, lacrosse? The lacrosse building in Melbourne, which has burned a couple of times.
I don't know about Melbourne. I know more about that. I know more about Grenfell.
Yeah.
Because that was in a London borough, 17. It's one of the 17-story tower blocks. and it basically they declared it was a fire starter. They decided to do because in London there was this thing that happened with all of these pretty panels, and everyone was sort of like putting pretty panels on like massive, there's 17 stories.
All these sandwich panels, I believe.
Yeah, and they effectively just basically, they were extraordinarily flammable. They formed a little wind tunnel in a lot of places, so it was just pumping the fire in. So it was just horrific. Yeah, and they still haven't removed panels from a lot of those high rises. Yeah, I mean, it's one of those things where it costs them millions to put on pretty panels, and they still haven't removed it.
That's pretty much it. So you've got that panelling, that external cladding to update the facade of the building is 2 leaves of aluminium with polyethylene in between. Those two leaves. Polyethylene is really quite flammable once you get it going. And toxic. And once you get it burning, those aluminium panels will fall off the side of the building, spreading fire to other areas. And because you've got your wall and you set your aluminium panel cladding 50 millimetres off the wall, when you get a fire, it drags the fire up behind that, igniting other panels further up. So flames climb a building incredibly quickly. Now, there are different qualities of aluminium sandwich panel cladding. There are different combustibilities of them. So the new Royal Adelaide Hospital in the city, that's also clad with aluminium sandwich panel cladding. We've got thousands of buildings in Australia which are clad with aluminium sandwich panel.
Does it have that really highly flammable polyethylene, highly toxic highly flammable polyethylene in the Adelaide Hospital though?
I think those panels still do contain polyethylene, but they've got mineral fibre in there that reduces the flammability of it. Now, I don't really know anything more than that. I couldn't comment on the combustibility of that. But this all flows into our system for certification and so on, and we'll learn more about that as we work through. But we've got the Grenfell Tower, which is a very horrible thing. That being a thing in London, we don't really get news flowing to us through our networks so much.
I'm British Australian, so I'm actually I spend a long time in London. So so for me it's quite an emotional issue.
But what we are fed information on are things like the La Crosse Tower in Australia. If you remember the HIA Master Builders or something, they keep you updated about the situation of these things. And La Crosse Tower, luckily nobody died in that one, but it's burned a couple of times. But there was
a couple of times.
It's still standing though.
Yeah, it's still standing. But there was one very bad fire that caused a great deal of damage. The fallout from that was, I think, and don't quote me on it because I'm just sort of speaking generally, but the architects were approximately 30% liable, the builder approximately 30% liable, and the engineer that certified the installation of those panels 30% liable. And the person that started the fire, about 3% liable. Now we're still talking multi-millions of dollars, so that person who started the fire is still up for a very large amount.
They're bankrupt.
But and there's interesting situation with builder being able to novate their lease, novate their contract out of, or their liability out. But when you've got specifiers like an architect that are wearing that, their insurance companies, hopefully they're well insured. If they're not, they're bankrupt. But these liabilities flow on to the people who are specifying these things. You do have to be very careful about the way you specify
The other thing is, these things don't have to happen. Those 17-storey towers, right, they are awesome buildings. The flats inside of them are like, I used to manage those properties, right? And the flats flats inside of them are like very big terraces right inside of these properties. They're absolutely fantastic buildings. The people that live in them love them, and they actually build vertical communities. And that didn't have to happen. They have been standing there since the 1960s, like, 40 years, 50 years, and nothing has happened until someone decided to put pretty coloured panels on the damn things. It's like, the original design was brilliant. They've never had a fire like that. It's only when people go and do these kind of projects, half-assed basically, that this is what happens. I'm very passionate.
And going on with the half-assing that just said there, I believe in the report that was dug up on, it was drafter or someone who was doing the report when they were actually putting the panels on. I believe he actually specified a particular type of panel, and then followed on with 4 similar.
Yes. Yeah.
So essentially giving the builder the choice to go, well, he wants this one, but this one costs this much. Or I can go for the cheaper option, which looks the same.
There was really
And he went with the cheaper one, which was the polyethylene one that didn't have any mineral fibre.
There was really massive cost savings on that. That was
it. Yeah. And the devil is in the details, or in the notes. When you say this product or similar, you should never be saying this product or similar.
Yeah.
By the way, as drafters, and you've got to be aware of that.
You've just thrown away all control.
You've thrown away all control.
And what's more, you've assumed the liability for that thrown away.
Yes. Yeah.
Pointing is when they use the cheap material, how can they meet the standard government?
That's a British thing, but we've got the same sort of thing happening in Australia. That is what's under contention at the moment. We'll look at a little bit more about the role of these of people within the industry later on tonight. So you should steer away from making stuff. We should never make such statements. But also, there is an onus upon you, a moral
duty of care.
Yeah, duty of care, that you actually understand these things. That you go, okay, well, using an aluminium sandwich cladding in that situation of multiple stories, creates a very big fire risk. Maybe we should use fibre cement sheet cladding, which also has a glossy finish to it. There are other products that you can use which are non-combustible that give a very similar result, or you can do some fantastic facades, artistic approaches that are non-combustible, and it's about understanding those things.
It's also about holding the line and not, I'm going to make it bad, but there's a level of politics under this of holding the line and just say, no, we need this specification because of fire, full stop, rather than the sort of more, we'll be a little bit strategic about this because they might want it to save costs, so X or similar. So actually holding the line and saying, no, I'm not putting my name on that. And that's the politics of it, is that you will actually come under pressure to be the source of cost savings by being a little bit famous as someone else. Because how could it possibly happen? When was the last time we had fire?
Because, I'll talk about that a little bit later. So SAPA can say also they have their guidelines, but also they set out information in regards to some of the fines. So there are various mechanisms under which people can be fined, the OHS Act, Building Work Contractors Act, etc. So $300,000 maximum fine for reckless conduct that exposes the person to risk of death or serious injury or illness. Specification of building products can do that. So that's So it's not only your insurance you have to worry about, but the lack of insurance you have to worry about, but also fines associated with that. We'll talk about OneNote enough. I think we can skip that. Here's that introductory video to say this is how you go about setting up your OneNote. Have a look at it, but just have a play. And some more about research and study skills and introductory video there. So in our last hour, we'll go through this. This isn't relating to materials and methods per se. It's about the background. We've discussed some of this, so I'll try to get through it relatively quickly. Within the National Construction Code, we have various different classifications of buildings. The reason we have different classifications of buildings is because we use buildings differently. Buildings perform differently for various different reasons. In regards to safety, if we're in a residential dwelling, typically the people within that residential dwelling will know where the exits are. If we are in an educational facility, people won't necessarily know where the exits are. So we need to design.
I know very well where the exits are.
And
all of us have gone through that several times. By this stage, But it can't be assumed that you do.
No.
And and also
Joe Schmo walks in off the street and just so happens to be there when the fire alarm goes off. What the hell's he going to do?
And there's also different ways that we have to go about containing fires and so on. Different types of buildings. Within a residential building, we have certain standards around comfort, insulation, etc. So we have environmental standards that we have to meet. You don't have to meet those environmental standards in a car park or warehouse or So we have different uses and different approaches to construction for a good reason. So
construction down here, where's that from?
Actually, that one I don't know. So these are. This is a bit of a mash of slides. Jason pulled this one together, so he grabbed those. That one's a South Australian one, but bottom right-hand corner, I don't know.
That's rather awesome, actually. Yeah.
Like little beehives or something like that. But do any of you know the architect who designed this place? South Australian architect. So Max Pritchard, he's done a lot. So with my work constructing large water tanks for a while there, it was like one Max Pritchard project to the next sort of thing. He's done a lot, but does really interesting stuff.
Because there is actually requirements around having water tanks in buildings now, in new build now, isn't there?
Well, there is. It's 1,000. You have to have 1,000 litres, and that has to be plumbed to the toilet.
1,000 litres. That's like only a cubic metre.
Yes, exactly. So it's very, very little, but it is actually a very helpful thing. And I'm not saying that because my family do water tanks. Like we do water tanks that won't really fit into this room. Like
no. You did the big brown ones.
The big ones for fire systems, etc. But in regards to that, you have 1,000 litres, but that keeps getting replenished all the time. Okay, it doesn't get replenished in summertime. But that 1,000 litres will translate to something like about 15,000 litres throughout the year because it's continuously replenished whenever it rains.
Yeah.
And that's the idea. So a small contribution.
It's brilliant.
It's very very sensible. So we've got our Class 1 buildings and then Class 10 structures. So non-habitable buildings, so garages, carports, or other structures, things, mast, antenna, swimming pool, all the like. Very interesting thing about those water tanks is they don't actually come under a classification of a building within the NCC. They are a product, which is very, very interesting approach. Even when they are bolted together on site, etc., with steel trusses and whatnot, they're a product as opposed to strangely enough.
Maybe they just didn't want to have a new classification.
Well, those type of tanks have been around for about 20 years, but it's been the last 6 or 7 years that they've
really.
Yeah, and NCC, like any large thing,
Yeah.
follows.
Yeah,
follows time.
absolutely.
But yeah, so you always find quirks. And the reason we have class 1 and class 10 lumped together is because that's typically how they happen. You build a house, you build a shed, you build a swimming pool, etc. And that's in NCC volume number 2. Volume number 2 covers class 1 and class 10. Volume 1, NCC volume 1, covers class 2 to 9 buildings. That's your multi-residential through to commercial.
Just out of interest, where are cyclonic buildings under class 1?
So cyclonic, you've got a diagram or a map of Australia within the NCC that defines which areas are cyclonic. So you've got this band that follows around the top of Australia. Anything above that is cyclonic. So it comes in sort of about the Queensland New South Wales border and then hooks up.
But the stuff that we've downloaded is actually non-cyclonic.
Yes, and unless you're going to be building Brisbane up or sort of Mount Isa up, then you're not going to be in cyclonic.
Right. Yeah.
So class 2 to 9, residential, commercial, and industrial. We've got our various different structures within that. So this is a diagrammatic representation of it. So this is from the old BCA. So it was the Building Code of Australia. We used to have the BCA, and then we used to have things like the South Australian Housing Code and our state-based codes. They have been abolished, absorbed into the National Construction Code, so being national. But what we end up having within the National Construction Code is we have the National Construction Code, and then we have all the little bits that the various states could never agree upon with its inclusion. So you've got state and territory variations. So as you're reading through, you'll find a red section. It goes SANT, state and territory variation. For laundry, you have to tile to 150 millimetres above your washing machine tap outlets in South Australia. Everywhere else, you don't need to do that.
Because we like a nice bathrooms.
Or you go the other way. All the houses in places like Darwin, for some reason, I don't really know why, they have to have their houses all cyclone resistant.
Yeah, exactly.
Makes no sense to me living in South Australia. Why do we care about making houses cyclone resistant?
Yeah, so we have a national construction code, but because not every area is created equal, not every wind speed is created equal, we have state and territory variations. Or laundry. Or another quirk is, and this is actually, and this is a funny thing that's not that some people working in the industry still don't know, is that kitchens are included as wet areas in South Australia, whereas they're not included as wet areas in the rest.
They should be included as wet areas, because the bottom line is there's water coming out of something there.
Yeah, and
there's an active tap. It should be classified as a wet area.
They can get very wet.
Yeah. I mean, look, Australia has
especially if you have kids.
Wet area, really good wet area regulation.
Yes.
It does, because like working in the UK, I mean, they didn't have to have any kind of drainage in the floors of bathrooms, and I can't even tell you.
The health impacts of that.
Well, for multi-story flats, it was an absolute nightmare because someone would come home.
Speaking of mould.
Well, no, because normally it was okay. They used to actually put carpet in the bathrooms. But the thing was...
God, that makes no sense.
But the thing was that because you didn't have that drainage there, what you would have is people would come home and like the upstairs neighbour's bar had overflowed.
Yeah. And straight down into your house.
Straight down. And it was, oh my gosh.
So it is actually, I should check that is actually recording.
Recording. Yeah, don't worry.
All of these
nutcase ramblings a bit.
Just making sure. So we've got those state and territory variations, different things that could not be agreed upon. beware of them. They're embedded both in the general text of the NCC, but then you have different state and territory variations at the back of the NCC. Yes, so they're in two places. Beware of that. I know, that's yeah. So different
Would there be any
classifications.
overlap between them?
There is overlap between them, but not always. Yeah. And it's not, I'll get into what I was about to say a little bit later on. So different classifications, you get to know those. We'll do get to know them. It's not particularly applicable to materials and methods, but you will. This is a very important thing to get to know throughout the course. But I guess in one way they are applicable to materials and methods. So for a class 1 and I think a class 2 building, you're allowed to use aluminium sandwich panel for the whole thing. For 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, etc., you're not now. So yeah, so classifications they definitely do flow into materials, right?
Yeah.
And what you cannot do. Yeah, we'll leave it at that. So buildings must comply with planning regulations. So we actually have a system which is currently in flux. We've got the Development Act of 1993, but then also the Development Regulations of 2008. So an Act of Parliament is followed by regulations. So Act of Parliament sets the broad framework, regulations set a more prescriptive thing. This is what you must do. That Act has now been superseded by the Development Act of 2016.
Mm-hmm.
Within that Development Act of 2016, it allows for the existence of private plans. So currently, if you were to go for planning approval, you would have to submit your planning approval to your local council,
Mm-hmm.
and they will make a planning approval assessment based on your submission. The change that is going to come through is that you will be able to appoint the planner that you want to send your stuff to. They will be able to make that determination. What's being slated is that is for fairly simple projects, and we also currently have like a bit of a forerunner, like a dip your toes in the water approach to that called ResCode. So you can get a fast-tracked method of approval via ResCode rather than going to your local council. But in the not too distant future, we'll be able to have private planners that you send your plans to.
Can I just ask,
see the
what
full
happens
outline.
if the council disagrees with the certified plan?
We don't know yet. And so there are many, and this is the really interesting thing. Well, I don't know yet.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I haven't looked into this thoroughly, but I've spent a fair bit of time digging around for information about what's going to happen. As far as I can ascertain, not many people really know how it is going to be rolled out, how these various different scenarios are going to play out.
Are they going to rewrite the regs to cover off on the new act?
I don't know if the regs have been completed yet or not. I don't expect so.
Right. Are they expected to be vastly different?
I don't know. No.
Right.
And what we're wanting to do is actually get somebody in here at the TAFE who is involved in the process that can give us a rundown of where things are at the moment. So because we've got an attendance day, so where external students come in week 6, I think, and we get various different guest speakers and things like that. That's the sort of person we're wanting to get in at this point in time.
Right. Do you have a particular date for that attendance day, and it's encouraged for us to attend as well, if we can?
Well, yes, I will let you know about it. I think it's September 13th, but when that date is locked in stone and we know what's happening, yes, I'll definitely tell you about it.
Okay.
Because it is a great thing to come to, whether you're internal or external student, whether you have any mandatory requirements or not. So we've got our planning regulations, and that's something which is in flux, slated to change in the very near future. We've got various different tiers of government, so local government, state government and federal government. they have an input into various different things that happen about the place. So if you, I'm not sure what sort of projects the federal government get involved in, but I dare say if you want to put in an airport, you're going through that. If you're changing Mitsubishi plant into a TAFE, then the state government will be involved in such projects.
I don't think that the feds have any kind of sign-off on the local environment. I think that they've got the NCC, and that's a cognitive shock or whatever it was, a national thing. But I don't think that they actually have an input to planning. So, for instance, like with the airport in Sydney, that was purely a state issue, right? There was federal money, and there was a federal push to actually have the infrastructure installed because there's such pressure in Sydney and it's like a major city and it's very close to Canberra. But that the feds themselves don't have the planning or any kind of input. It's very much down to the state government. Like, I mean, if someone said, well, we're going to move Adelaide Airport to wherever, out to the port, that would be entirely down to the state government to decide whether they agree with it. So, cool. Yeah.
Federal would probably be like shutting an Olympic stadium in. I would imagine federal government would want to have their toes on that.
They might have their toes, but I don't think they
don't have any control.
They don't have jurisdiction. There's the difference between they may fling the money in, they may put a huge amount of pressure on the local politicians.
And I'd probably say we want it to look like this and to represent these things.
Absolutely, absolutely.
But at that point, everything falls to state.
In terms of jurisdiction, in terms of if they're putting the money in, well, then they're going to have input into the design and input into all of those things.
So it sounds very similar to a customer interaction.
Yes.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Federal government is basically just a customer at that point.
Yeah, exactly. But they're a very, very tough customer.
They're a very high-rolling customer.
Yeah.
So we've got involvement of our various different tiers of government. We also, so if we're doing a simple residential development, yes, it's going to be our local council that we deal with. So local government. We're also going to have to abide by any encumbrances on the property. So an encumbrance, that's essentially the word to encumber, which is to stop or to restrict what can be done. So there are encumbrances that are lodged on a title. If I want to purchase a piece of land, like freehold, I can get a paper title from Land Titles Office, or I get a digital title. It all used to be paper. It all used to be, there are two copies and they're modified and signed together when the conveyancers are in the room. Now it's all digital records, but you still have these certificates of title. The certificate, and do I have one on the next page? Yeah, very, very grainy one on the next page. That certificate of title sets out important information as it pertains to that property, to the identification of the property, and to state what the interest is, what the financial interest is in that property.
I was told that they are no longer, they're more of an advice than they are of a legal document anymore, because all of the information that is considered legal is the information that is held in the system, in terms of the land title system, the land registry, whoever they outsourced it to. But that would be managed through blockchain. So it'd be, but I was told this morning by another lecturer that they don't mean anything anymore. Well, they do, because you can actually see what you're doing, but they're actually not legally, they're not legal tender in terms of title. That it's actually what will be held in the registry will become the absolute title.
Well, yes, of course, yeah. So we've moved to a digital system as opposed to a paper-based system. Yes, people still like to hold that piece of paper, and people will go like, this certificate of title is really important. If there's a bushfire, I'm bringing it with me.
Yeah.
right?
But actually,
But yeah,
it's managed through blockchain technology, and
exactly.
it's like
It's all very safe. Safely stored digital information. And if I wanted to get a certificate of title, I'd pay $21.70 and print out the certificate of title from.
And not die.
Yeah. So that's right. It is all data. And the Lands Titles Office, along with the Valuer General Office, I think, has now been privatised as well. So probably know more about.
No. I just heard that it had been privatised, and I heard the price, and I thought, you know what, the state government got done on that, because that is big data. Literally, sort of like, it was an American company bought it, and they paid far more than the government expected them to. And I just thought, it got done. Because you just think the way you done.
Well, I think it's a very interesting scenario whereby, particularly with things like the Valuer General's office, where you have an office which is responsible for doing valuations for rating and taxing, that I don't know what the mechanism is for responsibility of data sets, within what parameters, within what sort of standard deviation those figures can be, etc., etc. There would be a whole framework around that. I imagine that, but I think it's a very odd type of thing to
the actual type. I've got a real uncomfort level around that sort of stuff not being managed by public servants. Full stop. Because I think public servants have a particular role, which is to be completely and utterly without any federal labour.
Yes. Yeah.
But at the same time, the technology that's used to store it, and I can't remember exactly what the details were, I just got interested in blockchain at one stage, and it was like, you actually, it's actually, because it is actually storing about, so many different places and whatever, and with backup copies and whatever, the whole technology of it is literally unbreakable. That is why digital currencies work, because they're literally unbreakable.
Yeah. And so it used to be when I was first studying and going to the Lands Titles Office, to go to the upper room, you can't take a pen. You can only take a pencil with you, because it was all paper based. But whereas now you can't get a fool who takes a pen into the upper room and writes on things, because it's all digital, it's all locked away, there are all multiple copies of that one thing. So it's very, very secure in that way. So we have our certificates of title, and then on that title now, unfortunately, yes, that's really a bit too grainy to see, but we can make this out. This says easements, and they're nil. So on this property, there are no easements lodged on the title. That doesn't necessarily mean there are no easements related to that property, because there are things called statutory easements. When we've got high tension power lines, we don't always, sometimes we will, but not always, have an easement recorded on the survey plan image or the title. But the Office of the Technical Regulator can say, if you're wanting to build this thing under that high tension power line, it has to be this particular distance, or they can say, no, you can't build that under there. So if you see a title, well, a block of land, and you look at it on site or Google Earth or something like that, and you see power lines going across and no easement recorded under that, the next step you do is you contact the Office of the Technical Regulator and say, what are the restrictions around building in this scenario? And they'll go, okay, what's the address, etc. We give the address or what's the title reference. And they'll say, okay, it's this kilovolt power line, these are the restrictions around that. You have to.
Are there any further statutory easements that exist?
I haven't encountered any others, but another form of infrastructure which typically doesn't have any easements for it, telecommunications. So a lot of your old Telstra cables and sometimes Telstra or Dial3D don't even know where they're running.
Right.
There are Telstra cables about the place that don't have easements associated for them as well.
Will those Telstra cables, I mean, with the introduction of broadband, will those Telstra cables actually just be of any relevance anyway?
Some still would.
Yeah, some still would. So where you've got fibre to the node and copper premises, well then, yeah, they certainly will. But yeah, there are different forms of NBN. And yeah, it is one of the, what is it? Telstra are not dealing with their, they don't seem to have as many staff on to deal with things like other service providers. And I imagine that's because of the changing nature of communications and where we're headed, etc. So yeah, valid area of exploration. So easements are a form of encumbrance because an easement will say you cannot build here, but actually never take that as a hard and fast rule. If you've got an easement and you want to build on that easement, first of all, look at the nature of the easement, look at the nature of your development. Are they conflicting uses? Are they not conflicting uses? If they're not conflicting, or that's a bit of a grey area, contact the easement holder and say, like if it's SA Power Networks, say, what can we do on this easement? Never take it as a hard and fast rule because you can explore these things. I had an easement on a property basket range, had a really wide easement on it and a low voltage power line running down that. The reason I had a really wide easement on it because that was an old road reserve. There was an intention for a road to go through there that never went through there because of topography. But rather than resurvey, they just go, okay, well that's an easement, we'll run power lines there. It's really wide, and phoned SA Power Networks, and they looked it up and they said, oh yes, our power lines are here. The easement extends, quite a bit further than that. We don't actually have an issue with encroachment onto that easement.
And they'll give
for
that
this.
to you in writing, right?
Yeah, and then what they want is that to be in writing.
Right.
So you have that initial discussion with them to find out this information, get it to them in writing. That's how a lot of things work. If you're having discussions with council, so you have some informal discussions with duty planner, then get that in writing. So yeah, you do have to get everything in writing and document it. But so easements do control what you can and cannot do on property, but it's not always a hard and fast rule. Be aware of that. Most of the time it is, by the way, but it can also be worth checking these things out. That's one form of encumbrance. Another form of encumbrance is when developers carve up large greenfield sites. So let's do Golden Grove, we've carved up this hillside and we've created separate residential allotments. What those developers will do is they will lodge a developer's encumbrance on every single title. And those developers' encumbrances will be fencing shall consist of colour-bond fencing to 1.8 metres high, and gardens at the front of the dwelling will be established within 12 months of occupation. Roof materials may be tile or colour-bond, etc., etc. They'll prescribe the style of dwelling and the materials within that development, because people purchasing into that development will want to know that there's some sort of homogeneity of development.
Basically, they'll give you the cookie cutter.
They'll give you the cookie cutter. So that's the first thing that helps establish that or entrench that cookie cutter in. So you've got developers' encumbrances, but then you've also got the sort of industrialised approach to
housing,
yeah. But those, you typically have the developers' encumbrances on large residential developments.
Yeah.
On smaller developments, you may not. On inner city brown or in a metropolitan area brownfield sites, you won't. So if you knock down a house and paint it, you're not going to have developers' encumbrance there. But you're going to have to meet within council regulations, and yes, there are things stipulated within the zoning as to what you can do in terms of scale, massing, setbacks, materials, etc. But you also have, at times, council will request at planning approval, they will want to know what colours, what materials are on there. In addition, it's not specified in the zoning. There's no they don't allude to it at all, but they ask for those things because they want to say, okay,
Well,
we want.
Another one of the courses I was given, it's basically on the council, and for the particular area that you're looking at, it's like houses should be of dark hues,
Yep.
natural tones,
Yep.
in which case they have actually stipulated a framework in which they can ask you for it.
Yeah.
If they don't have that framework, then they have very little to support them if you challenge it. But if
Yes.
they have that dark hues and natural tones consistent with a rural environment in Mitcham, then they actually are in a position where they can turn around and say, no, you can't have your house that way.
Yes. Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
Oh.
So yeah, so
homogenisation of housing.
so we have those various different mechanisms through which a homogeneity of aesthetics is driven or imposed. Exactly. So they are also forms of encumbrances because they encumber what you can actually do with the land. So we have encumbrances, some are lodged on title, some aren't. Some other things like caveats. If I do building work for somebody and they decide not to pay me, I can then go to courts and impose a caveat on that title, or on that property, so that person cannot sell that title without paying me out first. And you've also got other things like mortgages. So very few people pay cash for places. They have to take money from the bank. The bank will say, well, we want first right to grab that if anything goes sour. We will place a mortgage and lodge that mortgage on the title. So we've got schedule of endorsements, and then we'll typically have a mortgage under here. So mortgage to something capital proprietary limited or something.
I was saying the next one down is negotiations or something along those lines.
Yeah, and then So under that you have other documents or notations and other documents that relate to that title, being it historical information such as parent titles. If we've got a section of land and carve that up into various different pieces, well then we'll have a parent title mentioned, but then other dealings or something.
Does that parent title have any relevance to anything or whatever?
No, that's more for historical information, for enabling people to track things. So when you have a surveyor come out to your property to establish your boundaries, a big part of their work is to search through old records to get to surveyors' logs. And to get to those surveyors' logs, they need older reference points. So they'll look at parent title, and then that parent title will be mentioned in something else which refers back to that original surveyor's logbook that gives. So it's handy for all that stuff. Zoning requirements. So various different councils have different zonings. To break it down simply, you've got commercial, we get industrial zonings, residential zonings, rural zonings, etc. But then many zonings within that. And then also we have heritage considerations. So heritage considerations can be of superficial nature or extremely onerous, depending on whether it's state heritage listing or local heritage listing, and if it's state heritage listing, what's prescribed within that state heritage listing for that particular property.
And heritage considerations also seem like a type of encumbrance as well.
Well, it's a massive encumbrance. So does anybody know the old House of Chow site on Hutt Street? No. So you've got the new House of Chow on the eastern side of Hutt Street. Directly across the road on the western side of Hutt Street, there used to be the old House of Chow. Historic building, owned, a developer bought that property, and yes, it was state heritage listed, but they decided to bring the bulldozers in one night, knocked it down. They were not able to develop on that site for a very long time. So there was big section on Hutt Street that was empty for a very long time. Obviously, that costs a lot of money.
They should have been forced to build it right back up exactly the way it was.
Out of their own pocket.
Out of their own pocket, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, but it is and look, it's a double-edged sword, the heritage listing things, because you see some buildings which are left to rack and ruin, hoping that they fall down, and so you've got so you've got councils that right across from the Maiden Magpie Hotel on the corner of Paynham Road and McGill, where they come away from each other there. You've got this old apothecary building across the road from there. All sorts of things have happened to that building over time. I won't speculate, but it's one of those scenarios where
someone's going to be dead before they actually get to develop it. Yeah.
Yes, but they're holding out. Yeah. So it's a two-edged sword sort of thing. You do get retention of heritage, but then you also get destruction of heritage because people want it to get to the state where the council will say, yes, it's unsafe.
Yeah. It's unsafe. Do with it as you wish, so long as you make it safer.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, there was also things like the fire. I can remember there's a huge fire in Sydney, Woolshed, down in it was just it's in Haymarket, which is just opposite all of the CBD, just across the water from the CBD, and it was this woolshed that was heritage listed. That it was literally waiting for a fire because it was the floorboards were drenched in lanolin.
Nice.
Because it had literally been a woolshed for about 60 or 70 years, where the large amounts of wool came in and were stored, and the entire floorboards were just absolutely soaked in lanolin. And when it went up, it was burning for hours. But someone did that. But they didn't really have to, obviously, because it was left in such a state that basically homeless people were squatting it.
Yeah. And
a lot of the homeless people that were squatting it were alcoholic and whatever. It was one of those situations. So they got away with it.
Yeah. It was unable to determine how.
Yeah, well, once you can't determine how it happens. I mean, if you bring a bulldozer in, that's one thing.
Yeah.
If it's a fire, that's why they refer to fire. When that sort of thing's going to happen. Fire is the preferred thing.
But working in repair and reinstatement. So because I've repaired a lot of buildings that have been partially burnt. One of them was a place up at Harndorf, a very old building made almost entirely of red gum slabs and hand sawn bits of timber. There was a fire in that. I think it was from a meter box or something. Not
that was
the
shit.
But yeah. So that got significantly damaged. We had to repair that building. We can't go repairing that with hand cut pieces of red gum slabs.
No.
These sizes, and if you had modern sawn red gum slabs or so, it doesn't fit. So had to repair it within the constraints of the heritage listing, but leave everything else there. So for people further in the future, for builders that work on the place, it would be possibly a very confusing thing to think, why have they maintained and protected all of these charred elements? And things like that. You end up doing things which for the people not involved may seem very nonsensical. But
there is a high rise in Sydney. It's got a beautiful atrium. Right at the edge, on one of the edges of the atrium, is an entire house. It's an entire heritage listed house that has been just completely and utterly, like they built the building around this, and it's a restaurant. They turned the house into a restaurant space, but they literally left the entire house because it was heritage listed.
Yeah.
And the atrium's large enough. So it's probably 2.5, 3 times the height of the house.
Yeah.
So it actually, and it's an absolutely stunning little piece, just because you walk in and you've got this beautiful atrium, very open space, very open air, and in the middle, and just, towards one of the edges, there's this house.
So what can be evidence can on one hand look like a constraint, can be
Can work with.
push a design in a certain fashion. So all sorts of permutations around heritage considerations. So I mentioned before the Development Act. So we won't dwell on that. So NCC and BCA. So BCA Volume 2 covers Class 1 to 10 buildings, that's residential and non-habitable buildings.
BCA.
Oh, sorry, so NCC, sorry.
It is NCC.
NCC. So,
You need to go
NCC.
back into edit mode.
Yeah. So, and you will hear it referred to as the BCA quite often, even though it's been superseded by the National Construction Code. So NCC BCA reference Australian standards, we know that. A good way of looking at it is the NCC says how you can build the worst building possible in a legal fashion. So what's the worst?
What is the absolute minimum? What is the absolute minimum?
You can
this ransack has to be to be legal.
Yeah. So we have that legal imperative to build to that standard. And then beyond that, that's about your customer service, you're willing to contribute beyond to general communities, etc. So it sets that minimum standard, and it does that, as I said before, via prescriptive measures within the NCC, but then through all the reference standards. So we'll have just a short section that says residential slabs have to be constructed as per AS 2870, and then it's a very short statement within the NCC, but that reference to AS 2870 brings us to an Australian standard. So it's actually essentially, if you follow it right through, it's a very large document. There is a lot to know, and look, I'll teach you as much as I can within this class, but like myself, you'll continue to learn all the time. There's more and more to learn, and when you think you know it fairly well, there's updates. So things change.
That's beautiful building too. What's that?
Oh, I think that's I don't know what that one's called. That's in Dubai.
I think it's hotel.
What's that?
Hotel?
Yeah, I'd say it's a hotel. Yeah.
I imagine it's designed to look like a sailboat.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. Upside down. Yeah.
Oh no, that's the sail.
Oh, that's the sail.
The island that it's on is the boat itself.
Yeah.
Oh, right. Because what I'm seeing is a boat, sort of like half of a boat. It's sort of like.
Yes.
A crash boat.
Yeah. Oh, yes, yeah.
I'm more just thinking of the post at the top and the side posts.
Yeah.
It just looks like a sail.
So the Development Act says that the councils can impose zoning, and you have to gain approval by the council for these activities. So under the Development Act defined as new construction, so if you're building something new, demolition or removal of a building. So if you want to demolish a building, you need to get that council approval, or demolish portions of a building if they're structural. So if you have structural elements, then you need to gain council approval for doing so. Excavation or filling incidental to construction or demolition. So there are certain volumes of soil. If you exceed that volume of soil without getting approval, you may be in trouble for that. Any structural alterations. So it's fairly straightforward. But then also to ensure that net grabs everything, it says any other prescribed activity. So because you get people that do some odd things that people may never expect would be done. And so
do we have any examples of those, like really good examples?
No, I haven't thought of any really good. Yeah, any other prescribed activity. Well, it may be, I don't know, construction of a dam, or you might dig a trench.
Oh, I know. Maybe construction of a windmill.
Construction of a windmill.
I've always wanted a windmill.
Yeah.
Like maybe you've got a river going through your property, and for some reason you're like, I don't want this river anymore.
Yeah, you divert that.
Or you build yourself a water mill, right? Because you've got the river.
Yeah, you've got a river, but for some reason either you don't want the river or you want to utilise the river. The council's not thinking, what's this person going to do with this river? They just don't know. Any other prescribed activity.
People can always come up with something new.
Alteration of a river.
Yeah. All sorts of things. Yeah. So procedure for development approval. First, we lodge application for council. So we may see changes to that. Approval consists of planning consent and building rules consent. Now, if we were a large building company that's doing some very cookie cutter homes, we would do planning consent and building consent at the same time. So we'd have our plans, have our notes, have all our details done. That goes into council, and then the building rules consent stuff goes on to the private certifier. So done at the same time. But you don't always have to do that. Sometimes you can do staged approvals, and sometimes you can get approval for a shed before you get approval for a house or so. That the council don't like that very much, but you can always ask. So you can stage your approvals, get planning consent, and then when you know, oh yes, they will approve this, that's all good, give you approval consent. So planning consent is assessed against the development plan and what's included in the zoning, and then building consent is assessed against the National Construction Code and relevant Australian standards. Important documentation for assessment of a development application. We've got plans, specifications, engineers report or reports, indemnity insurance, CITV levy.
What's a bore log?
So bore logs, when we take soil samples, we do a bore, and that's done through. So we've got, let's say that's our ground surface. That's the grass on there. We'll take a sample all the way through that soil. In that soil, we'll have various different horizons of soil. So we might have humus layer here. We've got reactive clay. We have clay mixed with weathered rock or something. So you take those soil samples and you lay them out in these Corflute trays to look at those various different horizons.
Because if you've got sand and then you've got another layer of sand underneath all of that, then the foundation's going to slip down there.
Yeah. So there are all sorts of ways in which soil behaves.
And you'll take several of them across an entire site.
Exactly.
No soil's ever a straight line.
No, exactly. And there, if you're doing a large housing development, you take soil samples, you're finding a lot of consistency between your soil samples, you can take less samples. I can't remember exactly where it's referenced, where it says what you have to do, but you have to take 3 samples to 3 metres deep on each property at the intended house site, unless you're doing a whole heap of allotments and you're finding a consistency through that, and you can interpolate that pattern from less. But the people I used to work for would like to do soil samples to 4 metres, so because within South Australia we have what are called deep-seated clay soils, which can take moisture down to a very far, to a much greater distance, and 4 metres down can still have an influence on heat as a result of moisture. But the minimum requirement is to 3 metres. Once you get those soil samples, you analyse those soil samples, you look at the various strata of soil, how that soil is going to react in the presence of moisture, and how strong that soil is, what its bearing capacity is. Then that is all included in this table, which is called a bore log, and all of that information can be fairly easily read by the engineer who's designing the footings. So they can say, all right, we've got all those different layers of clay, that gives us a Y value of 80, which is a highly reactive site. For that highly reactive site with this particular weight happening on footings, we need to have footings of this depth, etc. So the Borlogs are a table, it spells all that out in there. And just a real quick summary of soils in SA. So we've got a lot of reactive clay within the metropolitan area, unless you're building along the torrents where you've got all these deposited loams which are far less reactive. So there's a strip along the torrents which is really good for building from. But for the metro area, we've got a lot of reactive clay. Then in some pockets, we've got collapsing soils, but they're very rare. So wherever you've got deposited sand situations, wind-blown sand that hasn't settled through moisture, you can, if you build on those and then you have a leaking downpipe that adds a lot of moisture to that sand, that can lubricate those particles, they fit together better and you get collapsing. So predominantly we have reactive soils, and it's rare that you get anything that's class M soil. It's all sort of highly reactive and extremely reactive.
So class M, so in classes of soils is what we're looking at.
So class of soil. So you've got your class class S, which is for stable soils.
Stable.
Yep.
Yeah.
Class N for moderately reactive. H for highly reactive.
H. Yeah.
EH for hang on, yeah, look, I can't remember all this off the top of my head.
Really high.
You've got two classifications of H.
Right. Okay.
But then you've got E for extremely reactive soils.
Right.
And then after that you've got P class soils.
Problem.
Yeah, strangely enough, yes. Your problem soils, because problems aren't always about reactivity. Sometimes they're things like old clay pits around Bowden, Brompton, and west of there, where they had brickworks. They dug up big mounds of clay, and then they chucked car bodies and all sorts of stuff in there to fill them up and put dirt over the top. Yeah.
So
build on that is going to be problematic.
Yeah.
Unofficial trash heaps would probably be a B class as well.
Yeah, so when building in rural areas, do be aware of, that was a very standard practice in even some sort of fairly residential areas of towns, that people would have rubbish pits that they burn stuff. So look for those things on a site. So yeah, the council are going to want to see your plans for specifications. Specifications are the written documents. Your plans are the drawn documentation. Now, the way a lot of plans are going now, it's basically based around the drawing technologies. When you used to have to draw everything by hand, to draw notes was a very laborious process. Whereas now, you can just have your pre-written notes, cut them, or you just grab them and drop them in. And so a lot of notes now with drawing programs just dropped in. So we see a lot more written content on our plans. But in the main, you want to keep your plans as clear as possible. So if I have a floor plans, I will try not to get too many notes onto that floor plan, because if I do, it starts becoming muddled and you don't know which notes are actually important, which are superfluous. That's for the specification. So the specification will say, what type of carpet is within the building.
All right, so people get into sometimes putting things like the carpet and the number of sheets and whatever in a plan.
Yeah.
Which is just ridiculous.
It is. That's really for the specification. And plans and specification should be read together. And what you should always avoid is duplication of information across the both. Because if you have your type and brand of carpet in your plans and the same information in your specification, the customer changes their mind, you change it in the plans, you don't change it in the specification. The builder goes, all right, specification, right, what are we buying? Okay, we're buying that, buying that, buying that. They go out and buy it, they put it in, and the customer goes, oh, we changed that. You're the one who's liable. So you don't want duplication of information. You want to avoid duplication of information. Now that's changing. So that's that's talking about things very much from a CAD perspective, but that is plans versus specifications. Within things, programs like Revit, where you are working on one thing that automatically updates everything else, that sort of alleviates that problem to an extent within your drawing, but it still doesn't alleviate it across drawings.
One of the good things about Revit.
Look, no, Revit's fantastic. I don't really know it. I use AutoCAD professionally because that's what we did. Fine details. AutoCAD's great for fine stuff that you're drawing, where you're not drawing the same thing all the time. You're drawing lots of little bits and pieces. Revit's not good for that. Revit's good for bigger picture
kind of stuff.
Or for producing stuff quickly. So you go,
When you finish the floor plan, you've got a 3D model as well.
exactly,
And also the modulation. I mean, it's very IT based. I mean, that whole idea of sort of like you build up every IT program was a set of modules. Well, every set of Windows is a set of the same module. Instances of the same thing, and it's exactly the same principle. But obviously, when you get into the detail, it might require something else. Does SketchUp do 3D?
Yes,
SketchUp. And SketchUp, that's another program I'm not very familiar with. It's a very important program. A lot of architects are using it. You love it?
I love SketchUp.
Yeah.
Well, I think that is where, because I didn't understand what the difference was. I knew that the interior designers are learning SketchUp.
Most of them are the BIM umbrella.
Pardon?
BIM umbrella.
Yeah.
BIM.
Yeah.
It's BIM umbrella, yeah. But the thing is, if I didn't understand why the interior designers were using it, now you've explained it to me.
The best way to describe AutoCAD is it's a program working with lines and curves. And you can put that together into either a 2D item or a 3-dimensional item. Revit is working with walls and objects, which you put them in, and it makes a 2D plan as well as a 3D plan. SketchUp works exclusively in 3D. But it's yet again, it's going back to lines and curves.
Yeah. That's interesting. That's good.
So you're going to have to get those plans and specifications to council for your planning approval, but also for your building rules consent. But you have to show that your builder has indemnity insurance, or your builder will have to show that they have indemnity insurance for any work over $12,000. They also have to pay the Construction Industry Training Board levy and show that receipt. And then, application forms, of course, and payment of fees. Site plans typically are going to be 1:500 or 1:200, depends on the size of the block. So for a large, a large block like this, that's going to be, that one's 1:200, doesn't quite fit on the page, but for large blocks you'll have 1:500. For smaller developments, you do 1:200. You'll show things like the allotment boundary, so dash dot line. We show easements on there. This property doesn't have any easements that I can see. Adjoining boundary features at times. Sometimes that'll be important, sometimes it won't be important. That's up to your discretion.
What is an adjoining boundary feature?
Let's say we have, this house is not really built near the boundary, but it'll be another building. Typically. Location of works and other features and inverts. So where you're crossing the council road reserve, water table level, possibly if that's going to be an issue. It's not always an issue. Street water table. So you want to show how you're getting that stormwater to the street. So what you will typically have is your downpipes going to stormwater drain, and you'll have a leader coming off that saying stormwater to street water table. Council want to ensure that you're able to actually high enough above the street water table So it
Right.
makes it there.
It looks like they've got that on the left-hand side of the building. By the looks of it.
What's
Like
that?
right there. By the looks of
Yeah,
it.
yes, yeah. So that's our stormwater. They're heading off to that. So bench levels and finished floor level. So showing what the excavation is and the top of your concrete slabs, and any drainage services, things like septic tanks, rainwater tanks, etc. So you'll show all of those in the site plan. Floor plan must be dimensioned, and it must be dimensioned comprehensively. So you have to be able to build that house from that floor plan, right? Because that's why you're doing that floor plan, or you're doing that floor plan to get planning approval to show the council what the rooms are used for. But that floor plan is also going to be used by the carpenter or builder or so to build that thing. They have to be able to do that from your dimensions. They should never be scaling off stuff. Sometimes people will scale off things for determining various different bits and bobs that don't have to be accurate, but they have to get a general idea. But whenever you're doing dimensions, you've got to think about, how can this place get built? Can it be built from my dimensions? If the answer is no, you need to dimension it better. Elevations, that's showing the side of the building. That's not in perspective. That is just in a flat view. So there's no vanishing points, etc. Also, sometimes in the elevations, things will be in the way, and you decide, look, I don't want to show that that thing. We might have had a garage in front of this, but we're not interested in the garage, so you'll do a very light outline of that garage in front, and you have a leader saying, garage not shown for clarity, things like that. So you've got your elevations there, and then also sections in construction details. Sometimes there'll be no need to draw a section beyond the fact that you want to show a particular detail in an area. Still draw the section, because it shows the path of where that detail specifically relates. Sometimes working for engineers, they will just want to show some details about something, because they know that the person they're conveying that information to knows exactly what that detail relates to. But typically, if we're doing a set of plans for a house and we want to show how a steel column is interacting with this slab, then we have to draw a section through the house to show where that steel column is to begin with, to then draw that detail. And so we'll have a section, and then we'll have a detail call out, and then we'll draw the detail in another bit, possibly on the same page. Specification provide detailed information, material and workmanship used in the project, and any other information not shown on drawings. So you be judicious about what information is included in specifications, what's on the drawings. Timber design information. So you typically do a timber framing plan or roof framing plan, etc. That's actually a fairly complicated plan. That actually conveys a lot of information, because you've got to say what all your tie downs are. So how your battens are screwed onto your rafters, how your rafters are tied down to your wall frame, how your wall frame is tied down to your concrete slab. You're putting all that information there. What size pieces of timber you're using for your lintels, etc. That all goes into those framing plans. Provide 3 copies of documentation, but a lot of councils will accept PDFs. So, these things are changing as technology changes. But the thing is, the one thing that's not changing is one stamped copy returned to owner with approval. So you might send them digital, but they'll come back paper, and they'll come back stamped. Private certifiers. So that's about planning approval. This is about building rules consent. Councils have typically moved away from keeping people on their staff that will do building assessments. Some of the larger councils will keep people on their staff that can do the building assessments, but by and large, people use private certifiers. The main reason for that is, if you've got a working relationship with your private certifier, you'll send some stuff, and they'll tell you within a day or so whether there's a problem. You submit things to council for building rules consent. It'll be 6 to 8 weeks. They'll get back to you. They'll say there's a problem. There needs to be amendments made. You make amendments. 6 to 8 weeks. Hopefully you got everything in that, yeah. But if your client is waiting, 32 weeks extra, not happy. That's most of your year. So that's why it's worth paying that $500 to $1,000 for private certifier. Certainly there are flaws with the system. There's an imperative for private certifiers to say yes, financial imperative, or working relationship.
Yeah.
But whereas the public servant is less inclined to say yes, that can be seen as a pro.
That lack of flexibility that I'm talking about, that lack of, as a public servant whose job is to have relationships, I can tell you now that it's entirely impossible to have a relationship and say no. There seems to be something about the moment you build a relationship, a lot of people can't say no, which is sort of like, I suppose whether we take it into the private sector, some then private certified, maybe somebody council, because it could come down to that.
Yes, exactly, and it also comes down to, well, that's why we have things like aluminium sandwich panel plating going on to buildings, because private certified engineers, we've done a dozen projects for this builder. We're not really comfortable about this, but if we say no, then they're going to go to another private certifier,
and that's amazing.
And that other private certifier may or may not say yes.
That is the major issue. Look, most certifiers will be really good, but
yes,
once you get into the millions and millions of dollars for the work that you're doing, and you know that you're actually competing with somebody else who may say yes, that's where the politics sort of come in, and that's a real problem with it, I think. And I think that was a lot of the problem with that. I'd forgotten about the business of the specification. That you came back with. I've forgotten about that, but yeah.
So they do building rules of consent. They can assign a building classification, so they can decide what classification the building is. They can say, is it class 7 or is it class 8? Can modify building rules application, vary the application, so they can make those decisions. Provide provisional building rules consent, but they cannot provide development plan consent or development approval. But once we start getting things of private planners, look, I don't know what that interaction is going to be between private planners, private certifiers, whether the two.
You may find that they operate very much like legal, which is a different relationship, and you may find that there's actually very, very, they're absolutely on the ball. And you probably will find that there's the ones that will flex for the very big companies, and that's where the problems will kick in. Won't flex for the small ones. There won't be flexibility. They'll just be a relationship that you can work with. But for the very, very big companies, there will be real issues because it's politics and it's money.
Yeah, that's big business.
Exactly.
Because everyone says they don't have a price until they actually hear it.
So it must be qualified, experience, and insured. So obviously you don't want to have a private certified that's not insured. You have to provide notification to council at the key stages. So what are these called? These are called hold points in construction. So days notice to council and other authorities for excavation, trench stage. So council want to see that those trenches are actually representative of the slab that's going to go there. Steel fixing, so they want to see that you used N16 bars instead of N12 bars. And at wall and roof frame, they'll want to see that those structural elements have been constructed as specified. Builder's licensing, so I'll go through this fairly quickly because we're going over time a little bit, but to operate as a builder, you must have a builder's license, or to be able to get insurance, you have to have that builder's license. You have to show your insurance for anything over $12,000. You have to have both financial and legal studies to be able to get your builder's license. But that also means that doctors, lawyers, accountants, anybody who has those business qualifications can actually get a builder's license. What they cannot get is a site supervisor's license. Well, they can if they have the relevant experience to do so. So that's the difficult one to get experience-wise. So two parts to that. One is by doing an apprenticeship and working under a person, getting experience in all these trades, and then you can get your builder's license. Or the other one is where you approach the Office of Consumer and Business Affairs, you say, I have enough experience behind me to be able to sit and interview. And then you explain that to them, you provide that information, and then they say, yes, you are worthy of an interview, and they'll get you in for an interview, and that interview will be really hard. So they'll what's that?
They'll hammer you on every point.
Yeah, exactly. They'll pull you apart. But it's a great process. I went through that less than a year ago. It was awesome. It was very intimidating because they will follow a point until they find something you don't know, and they'll just keep going down that thing, and they control the interview. They make sure that they control the interview. But it's a great learning experience as well. And quite often they give you a second crack at it as well. So that first interview they'll hammer you, then you realise, oh, there's this stuff I didn't know. You go away and so straight after the interview you make notes about everything, and you go and check everything, and you go, did I get this wrong? Then they send you an email saying, you didn't pass, but you can do a follow-up interview on this date. Study like mad, and then you go back in. You go, yes, I know all those things now. That's the pro. So there's two different ways of going about it. But yes, you're not going to pass it unless you do have a lot of that experience to back you up in that, because it's difficult to gain that knowledge otherwise. Whenever we build a property, before handover, the site supervisor has to sign off that everything has been done in accordance with the National Construction Code, Australian standards, and done to the plans and specifications as submitted by council. So they're the ones that say that, but the builder carries the liability for that. Hence, why licensed builders also like to be site supervisors as well. Because if they're paying $10,000 for somebody they have to trust, or some amount of money for somebody they have to trust, that's not always a preferred scenario. So so builder's indemnity insurance is taken out by the builder, and it's taken out project by project, and protects the owner from non-completion of works or non-rectification of faulty works if the contractor becomes bankrupt, dies, or defaults in any other way. So there to protect the customer, and licensed builders are required to take out indemnity insurance on contracts over $12,000. Building contracts, various different standard forms of building contracts. So don't write your own building contract. Get a standard form contract from HIA or Master Builders. But there's Australian Standard 2124 for designing commercial contracts. So residential contracts are going to be fairly straightforward. Commercial contracts are going to be more tailored to that particular situation because you have more variation in them. So that's all the background behind building the introduction to it. From here on, we'll start getting into some of the building bushfire prone areas, and start looking at timber structure, steel structure, etc., residential construction.
Can I just ask for the next week, because obviously there's a study aspect behind it, in terms of getting down into researching sort of like that first assignment. The first assignment is to actually set up your folders.
Yeah.
But also getting down into that second assignment, which is the building one. Is there any recommended reading that you would say go for? Think about looking at to sort of get yourself orientated towards the bushfire stuff?
Yes. I've provided some resources on the Learn page. So we've got Yeah, it's going to be in under Class 1 building, residential dwelling. We have Minister Specification SA 78.
Alright.
Yeah, have a good read of that, and also then, you've already got it. Have a look at that package dog AS 3959 summary sheet. Well, that summary sheet is not only AS 3959; it's also other minister specifications in terms of floor heights and things like that. But yeah, read this one. So minister specification SA 78, and there's also ministers' regulations for building in bushfire-prone areas. I haven't supplied that on here. There is a great deal of crossover between the two. The Minister's Regulations is a far more detailed document about building in bushfire-prone areas. That, yeah. Yeah. So that'll probably be fairly brief. And then if you want to go further, have a look at AS 3959. Yeah. AS Australian Standard 3959.
3969.
Do you all know how to access Australian standards for free via the library here? Online library.
You should run through it again.
Should run through it? Okay.
Let's run through some else.
So, go to the TAFE site. What is this? We've got my TFSA, it's probably my library under there. When
actually, the TAFE portal. Oh, there it is. Yeah, there's one. No,
where's the library?
It's the portal. Go under the portal.
Okay, portal.
Oh,
right, yeah. Library under the portal. So then,
you
log in. So mine is my start number.
Go back,
yeah.
Because the critical search area, go into online resources databases.
Databases, yeah. But we'll still have to log in.
And then you have to log in.
Yeah.
But the thing is that
That'll
was the
take you
link I
straight
was
there.
missing.
Yeah.
That's me.
Yeah, so. I'm not sure if your PIN is still month, year for your
For a
birthday.
lot of people it
Yeah,
is.
yeah.
A lot of people have had a lot of trouble getting in. For a lot of people it is just, I didn't even think it was month, year. I thought it was day, month.
Oh, day, month. Yeah.
So they can try day, month.
Yeah.
If not, then they need to contact the library.
Yeah.
And I think there's a link somewhere there to contact the library. Yeah.
Yeah.
Second link.
Yeah. So second link, Australian Standards SAI Global. Open it
The
up.
single most annoying site to deal with.
Yeah. It can be a bit so. There we go.
So you've got
So-
available services.
Yes. Oh, yes. Beware of. Quite often that comes up at this. The superseded one comes up at the top. Beware of that.
So it's 2018.
yeah,
2019 amendment. There's an amendment.
Yes,
That
but
would only be
your
the
20,
amendment.
your 28. That shows the amendment only if you click on the most recent document.
That will
2018.
contain.
That will contain the amendment.
Fantastic.
And you'll also find that all of the PDFs on here are a self-destructing file if you ever decide to download it, which if you